On Friday, 10th April 1835, a body was found in a ruined cottage on a farmstead at the heights of Kilcoy on the Black Isle. Murder was immediately suspected. Earlier that day, Jane Stewart and John Campbell, along with Betty Stewart and Betty Gray, had been out planting fir trees at the Braes of Kilcoy. That evening, John and Jane went to a roofless cottage where she noticed the gauze from a veil. They still had their shovels from earlier in the day and began digging. They soon realised it was a body. It had been covered with turf and stones, but a glove was also found, and part of a shoe was noticed sticking out of the ground. It turned out to be 47-year-old Jane Breachin of Montrose. She was still wearing her purple wedding gown. Jane had been born at St Cyrus on 22nd August 1788 to parents Robert Breachin and Jane Falconer, the second child born of their 4 children. The body was taken to the townhouse in Dingwall, where the post-mortem was carried out by Dr. John Jones and Dr. William Hall. Clotted blood was found at her head, her jawbone was broken on both sides, and she had 2 lacerations to her head, caused by the fall of the wall at the old cottage, used to cover up the burial site. The man accused of the murder was John Adam, who became known as the Mulbuie murderer. He was the son of John Adam and Betty Chepland and had been born in the parish of Luntrathen in Angus on 4th January 1804. At the time of the murder, he was living in Dingwall under the assumed name of John Anderson. It's thought the pair had met while farm servants at Carisbank Farm near Breachin many years before, but she had spurned him when he'd asked her to marry him. Adam disappeared after he'd enlisted with the 2nd Dragoon Guards when he was stationed in the north of England. He'd fallen in love with 18-year-old Dorothy Elliot, whom he persuaded to elope with him on the promise of marriage, but to do so, deserted his regiment. He never kept his promise to her, but the couple eventually ended up in Dingwall, where they lived together as Mr. and Mrs. John Anderson, where he worked as a labourer in a local quarry. They took up lodgings with Mr. and Mrs. Urquhart around a year before the murder. Meanwhile, Jane had opened her own shop in Montrose, and she had some savings in her bank. Around Martinmas, 11th November 1834, Adam visited her there, dressed up and charmed her, claiming he was a sawyer in Inverness, and that if she married him, he would find a shop for her there. Against the advice of her friends, she accepted his proposal, and he returned to Montrose in March 1835, where they married on the 8th of the month, although she gave her name as Jean. She sold the shop and stock and withdrew £113 from her bank account before they left for Inverness. They found lodgings with Hugh and Janet McIntosh at Chapel Street, but at this point he changed his story and told her he had to work in Beauly. He came back and visited her several times, but the McIntoshes noticed he never stayed overnight. One day he came to see her and told her and the McIntoshes that he'd taken up a house between Taradale and Redcastle, so they left the town on Friday 3rd April, catching the Keswick ferry. She was never seen alive again, and he never rented the house, as he was still living in Dingwall with Elliot. By this time, Elliot was pregnant with his child. He found the quarry work hard, the wages poor, and the money was drying up. He decided his only way out had been to find Jane Brechin, his old flame who'd spurned him all those years ago, gain her assets by marrying her, then murdering her. On Sunday, 12th April, Adam was arrested for her murder and taken to the townhouse in handcuffs. At the time of his arrest, he had £75 hidden under his pillow. At the townhouse, he was met by a gruesome sight. The body of his dead wife had been placed on a table, while attendants stood round her, lighted candles in their hands. Of course, Adam denied everything. He was described as a handsome man of 6 feet 1 inches tall, with a cheerful demeanour, which he kept up as he denied having anything to do with her murder. The Inverness Courier later wrote that the cool and unconcerned attitude of the man was one of the extraordinary features of the case. In June, while he was serving time in prison, Adam made known he had a grievance with his incarceration. He complained about the heavy irons on his body and asked if they could be removed for part of the day so that he could be allowed to walk about the passages in front of his cell. He was allowed this concession while he awaited his trial at Inverness, which began on Friday 18th September 1835. The jury returned the unanimous verdict of guilty, and he was sentenced to death by the judge, Advocate Depute John Shaw Stewart, Lord Moncrieff. He'd made 3 declarations, but the discrepancies between the first 2 and the third were enough evidence in the jury's mind to convict him. He was to be carried from the bar back to the toll booth of Inverness, therein to be detained until the 16th day of October next to come, and upon that day, betwixt the hours of 2 and 4 afternoon, to be taken forth of the said toll booth to the common place of execution of the borough of Inverness, or such place as the magistrates shall appoint, and there and then to be hanged by the neck upon a gibbet by the hands of the common executioner, until he be dead, and his body thereafter to be buried in the precincts of the said toll booth. He was taken from the court to the toll booth, where he was indeed held until the appointed day. On Friday, 16th October, the sentence was carried out. It was reported 31-year-old Adam slept soundly the night before, and when he had woken, had spoken to the guards about his adventures in the army and other unimportant topics. It was also reported he ate a hearty breakfast and spoke of his regrets at his actions in his past life, including the betrayal of the 2 women. The execution took place at the Longman's grave by the edge of the Murray Firth. There was a large crowd of around 8,000 people waiting to witness the hanging. He was taken there by carriage and alighted wearing a camel black coat, which had been provided for the occasion. It was reported that this tall and handsome man of respectable appearance walked with firm step up to the scaffold. He was calm and stole a glance at the crowd. To the very end, Adam protested his innocence. Once dead, he was placed in a coffin and buried in an upright position beneath the old Inverness jail, that later became headquarters to Northern Constabulary. But this was not his final resting place, as his bones were moved several times. In 1853, they were moved to the new police station in Castle Wynd, and in 1912 were accidentally dug up but reburied at the same spot. 50 years later, they were discovered by a bulldozer driver demolishing the building during redevelopment. They were then buried at the former Farrelline Park School, which was a police station for 12 years, and it's believed he finally ended up beneath another police station, the Northern Constabulary Headquarters on Old Perth Road, which is now a car park. A plaque at the site reads, "It is believed that the earthly remains of John Adam, the last person to die by public execution in Inverness, lie buried beneath this site as required by statute in the year of his death, 1835. The Lord is merciful and gracious." Psalm 103, verse 8. January 2000 AD. As for Jane, it's believed she was buried at St Clement's Churchyard in Dingwall. After his death, it transpired he had in fact confessed to a fellow prisoner who was to tell the authorities once he was dead. His was the last execution to take place in Inverness. If you enjoyed this episode of Scotland's History, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching.